Imagine two young millionaire twins, children of privilege, who refused to eat a single bite of food after their mother's death. Their widowed father, heartbroken and desperate, tried everything. Doctors, chefs, even therapists. Nothing worked. But then a new black nanny entered their lives. What she did not only made the twins eat again, it changed the family forever. And what started as a desperate attempt to save two children ended with a wedding no one saw coming. The mansion was quiet, too quiet. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the kind that crawls under the skin, heavy and suffocating. Expensive chandeliers still sparkled, polished marble still gleamed, but everything felt lifeless. The laughter that once echoed through the grand halls had vanished the moment she was gone. Just weeks earlier, this house had been alive. The twins, bright-eyed, mischievous, always running through the corridors, with a beating heart of their mother's world. She had been the glue, the warmth, the melody in their daily chaos. But when illness took her suddenly, the world tilted. The father, once a man who believed that money could fix any problem, was forced to realize that wealth meant nothing against death. He stood in the dining room one morning, staring at the table. It was set with silver cutlery, fine china, and plates filled with carefully prepared meals. Yet, the seats where his children once sat were empty. The sound of clinking glasses had been replaced by the eerie scrape of his own chair, the echo of his solitary breathing. Upstairs, the twins sat cross-legged on their beds, refusing to come down. They wouldn't speak. They wouldn't smile. And most terrifying of all, they wouldn't eat. At first, he thought it was just grief, a phase that would pass. But as the days stretched into weeks, the refusal hardened into something darker. The plates of untouched food piled up in the kitchen like silent accusations. The father tried everything. He begged. He ordered. He bribed them with toys, sweets, and even promises of trips around the world. But nothing worked. The children's eyes, once bright like their mother's, had dulled into hollow pools of silence. Doctors were summoned. Therapists visited. Nutritionists prepared colorful meals, blending smoothies with hidden vitamins, trying to sneak nourishment past their lips. Still, the twins kept their mouths shut, shaking their heads silently. At night, the father wandered the empty halls, his footsteps echoing back at him. He had built his fortune on control, controlling businesses, controlling outcomes, controlling risks. Yet here, with his own children, he was powerless. Money, for the first time in his life, was worthless. One evening, he found himself standing at the door of their bedroom. He watched as they huddled together, whispering only to each other. His chest tightened. They were slipping away, not just physically, but emotionally, retreating into a world where he no longer existed. In the darkness, the widower whispered a promise to his late wife. "I'll fix this. I'll bring them back. Somehow." But deep down, he didn't know how much longer he could keep that promise. The twins were fading, and with them, so was the only piece of her he had left. The mansion, despite its grandeur, had never felt so cold. Days blurred into nights, and the father's fear sharpened into panic. What began as skipped meals was now a full rebellion against food. The twins, just 8 years old, had found their only weapon against the world that had betrayed them: refusal. The household staff whispered in the kitchen. Maids carried trays of food upstairs only to return with them untouched. Chefs who had once prepared lavish banquets now stood helpless, watching their creations rot in silence. The fridge, always stocked with delicacies from around the world, became a graveyard of uneaten dishes. The father tried, pleading. He sat with them at the dining table, his voice trembling as he held the spoon out, hoping they'd just take one bite. But the twins sat still, eyes downcast, their little hands clenched tightly in their laps. Their refusal wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, stubborn, and unbreakable. Doctors grew concerned. If this continues, they'll grow dangerously weak, one warned. Another suggested hospitalization for drips and force feeding. But the father recoiled at the thought. He couldn't bear the idea of his children restrained, tubes forced into them. They had already lost their mother. He refused to let them lose their dignity too. In moments of desperation, he turned to memories. He spoke of their mother at the dinner table, how she used to sing while cooking, how she'd sneak them bites of dessert before dinner. He told stories, tried to make them laugh, but the mention of her only deepened their silence. The twins would exchange a glance, a secret look between them, and then turn away. The mansion became a battleground, not a shouting, but of wills. The father against the twins. Every meal was a standoff, every plate a symbol of defiance. And with each passing day, the twins grew thinner. Their cheeks hollowed, their clothes hung looser. One afternoon, he tried something drastic. He cleared the dining table, removed the silverware, and brought in only simple bowls of soup, the kind his late wife used to make. He sat across from them, spoon in hand, eating slowly, deliberately, hoping they'd join him. But the twins sat there, lips pressed together, eyes welling with unshed tears. Finally, they pushed their chairs back and walked away. The father's chest ached as he watched them leave. He slammed his fist on the table, the silver spoon rattling against porcelain. Rage boiled inside him, not at them, but at himself. For all his wealth, for all his power, he couldn't win this war. That night, alone in his study, he poured a glass of whiskey and stared at the family portraits on the wall. His wife's smile seemed to mock him, soft, kind, unshaken by the chaos consuming their home. He whispered bitterly into the empty room. How do I reach them? How do I make them live again? He didn't know the answer, but soon, someone new would walk into their lives. Someone who would change everything. The father was running out of time. The twins were weakening, their small bodies showing the toll of their hunger strike. Every doctor's visit brought the same warning. They won't last much longer like this. Desperation pushed him into action. He hired private chefs from Paris, child psychologists from London, even spiritual healers who lit incense and whispered prayers in the grand halls. Each effort failed. The twins remained locked in their silent protest, as if daring the world to break before they did. The staff began to lose hope. Some quietly resigned, unable to bear the sight of children wasting away. The mansion grew emptier, lonelier. The father's empire thrived outside those walls, but inside his home, everything was falling apart. Then came the day she arrived. It was late afternoon, and the father sat in his study, head in his hands, when the housekeeper knocked gently. "Sir," she said cautiously, "there's a woman here about the nanny position." He almost dismissed it outright. Dozens of nannies had come and gone in recent weeks, all leaving in frustration. But something in the housekeeper's tone made him pause. When he walked in the grand foyer, he saw her. She wasn't like the others. No polished resume, no crisp uniform, no rehearsed smile. She stood there with steady eyes and an air of quiet strength. A black woman in her early 40s, dressed simply but neatly, her presence calm in the cold, cavernous hall. The father frowned. "You understand the situation? My children, they won't eat. They won't speak. They need more than a caretaker. They need a miracle." Her response was calm, almost disarming. "Children don't need miracles, sir. They need someone to see them." The father was taken aback. He studied her face, searching for doubt, for fear, but found none. Against his better judgment, he agreed to let her try. After all, what did he have left to lose? That evening, she walked up the stairs to the twins' room with no tray of food in her hands, no bribes, no tricks. Instead, she carried a worn storybook tucked under her arm. The father lingered at the bottom of the staircase, listening. For the first time in weeks, he heard a sound that sent chills down his spine, soft voices. The twins weren't laughing, not yet, but they were speaking. To her. The father exhaled, his shoulders sagging with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He didn't know it then, but this stranger at the door was about to transform not just his children's lives, but his own. The next morning, the mansion felt different. It wasn't a dramatic change. No sudden burst of laughter, no miraculous transformation, but a subtle shift like the first rays of sunlight breaking through a storm. The new nanny had arrived quietly, without the fanfare of the professionals who came before her. She carried no diplomas, no certificates, no claims of expertise. All she carried was herself, and, tucked under her arm once again, that same storybook. The father watched her from a distance. He couldn't help his skepticism. He was a man of results, of contracts and guarantees. But this woman had only brought calm words and steady eyes. Still, the memory of hearing his twins' voices the night before gnawed at him, pulling him toward cautious belief. At breakfast, he expected the usual scene. Untouched plates, the twins staring silently at their laps. But when she walked into the dining room, something unusual happened. The children looked up. They didn't eat, but they looked up. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but to the father, it was everything. She didn't pressure them. Instead, she pulled out a chair, sat between the twins, and opened her book. Her voice was warm, steady, and rich with rhythm. She read aloud, her words weaving stories that filled the hollow air of the dining room. The twins leaned closer, their eyes fixed on the illustrations. The untouched food on their plates remained, but for the first time in weeks, the atmosphere wasn't suffocating. The housekeeper, passing by, stopped and smiled quietly. Even the father, though he wouldn't admit it, felt the knot in his chest loosen. Later, while the twins played half-heartedly in their room, the father approached the nanny. "You didn't even mention food," he said, his tone half accusation, half curiosity. She looked at him calmly. "Children in pain don't need to be forced. They need to remember what it feels like to be safe first. Once they trust me, the rest will come." Her words unsettled him. He wasn't used to being told that patience was the answer. His world was built on speed, efficiency, and control. But there was something in her voice, gentle but unshakable, that silenced his protests. As the day went on, he watched her with the twins. She didn't hover or coddle. Instead, she let them lead. She sat on the floor with them, stacking blocks, listening to their whispers, nodding at their unspoken language. When one twin handed her a crayon, she didn't correct his grip or praise him excessively. She simply drew alongside him, matching his silence with her own. By evening, the twins weren't transformed, but they were no longer drifting away. They were anchored, just slightly, by the presence of this stranger. The father stood in the doorway, arms crossed, torn between disbelief and gratitude. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to think, maybe, just maybe, they'll be okay. By the second week, the twins still hadn't touched a proper meal. But something was shifting. They were talking, not much, just whispers here and there. But it was enough to prove the silence wasn't permanent. The nanny never once demanded they eat. Instead, she created rituals that had nothing to do with food, at least not at first. She began with stories. Every evening, she would gather them in the sitting room and tell a tale, not from her book this time, but from memory. Folk stories from her own childhood, tales of clever animals, brave children, and tricksters who always got their comeuppance. The twins listened, wide-eyed, and for the first time since their mother's death, they laughed. It was a small laugh, quick, fleeting, but when the father heard it echo down the hall, it nearly broke him. He stood in the shadows, his hand pressed against the wall, struggling to steady himself. That sound had felt impossible, but the nanny didn't stop at stories. She turned everyday moments into rituals of trust. She taught the children how to braid string into bracelets. She showed them how to water the garden plants, speaking softly about patience, about how even something small can grow if given time. And then, slowly, she began to weave food into those rituals. It started with baking. She didn't serve the children a plate. Instead, she invited them into the kitchen, an off-limits place until then. She tied little aprons around their waists and handed them flour to sift, eggs to crack, butter to stir. At first, they only watched, hesitant. But soon, the twins' tiny hands were covered in flour, their foreheads wrinkled in concentration. The smell of baking bread filled the house, soft and warm, curling through every cold corridor. When the loaves finally emerged from the oven, golden and steaming, she didn't cut slices and put them on their plates. She simply broke the bread in half, held it out, and said, "This is ours. We made it together." The twins looked at each other. For a moment, the father, watching from the doorway, thought they might turn away again. But then, Hesitantly, one twin tore a piece from the loaf. He nibbled, cautiously at first, then more boldly. The other followed. The father's knees nearly gave way. He gripped the doorframe, his eyes stinging. After weeks of starvation, they had finally taken food because of her. The nanny didn't celebrate loudly, didn't make a spectacle. She simply smiled, placed the bread gently on the table, and let the children decide. It wasn't about feeding them. It was about letting them reclaim something they had lost, the sense of comfort tied to food, the feeling that eating wasn't betrayal, but belonging. From that day, meals weren't about pressure anymore. They were about togetherness. And for the first time since tragedy had stolen their mother, the twins weren't fading. They were slowly, quietly returning. The mansion had grown used to disappointment at the dinner table. Silver trays carried up, silver trays carried back down, untouched. But on a quiet Sunday evening, everything changed. The nanny announced that dinner would not be served in the dining hall that night. Instead, she gathered the twins in the kitchen. The father frowned when he heard. He was unused to rules being broken in his own home. Yet curiosity kept him silent. She had the twins sit at the small wooden kitchen table, far humbler than the marble one upstairs. The flickering stove light cast a soft glow, and the air smelled of roasted chicken, garlic, and fresh herbs. Unlike the grand feasts of the past weeks, this was simple, comfort food, the kind of mother might have made at home. The father stood at the edge of the doorway, arms crossed, his heart pounding. He was terrified to hope. The nanny placed the dish in front of the children, but said nothing. Noerding, no coaxing. Instead, she served herself first. She took a bite, closed her eyes, and sighed contentedly as though it were the best thing she'd ever tasted. The twins watched her closely. Then, slowly, one of them reached for a fork. The father froze. The child speared a small piece of chicken, raised it to his lips, and chewed. His shoulders relaxed. The second twin hesitated, then followed. The father pressed a hand to his mouth, fighting the sob that threatened to escape. Weeks of silence, starvation, despair, and now here it was. The first real meal. The nanny didn't cheer or congratulate. She simply continued eating, making the act of dining together feel natural. The twins, in their own time, began to eat more. Bite after bite, their small faces softened, the tension lifting from their eyes. It wasn't much, not enough to rebuild what they had lost, but it was a start. The father couldn't stay hidden anymore. He stepped into the kitchen, his footsteps hesitant, unsure if his presence would shatter the fragile moment. The twins glanced up at him, their forks still in their hands. For a heartbeat, he expected them to stop. But then, one of them offered him a piece of bread. His throat tightened. He sat at the table, taking the bread with trembling fingers. They ate together in silence, not the suffocating silence of grief, but a shared, healing quiet. That night, the father lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling. He had spent weeks watching his children wither, powerless to stop it. And now, with no degrees, no wealth, no authority, this woman had done what no one else could. She had reached them. She had brought them back. He didn't fully understand it yet, but a seed had been planted inside him, a mix of gratitude, admiration, and something he wasn't ready to name. For now, all he knew was this. The nanny had given him back his children. The twins were eating again, not perfectly, not always without hesitation, but enough. The worst was over. The father could finally breathe without the weight of constant dread crushing his chest. And though relief washed over him, another feeling had begun to stir, one he hadn't expected. At first, it was gratitude. Simple, straightforward. He thanked the nanny every chance he got, though his words often felt clumsy. How could he possibly express the depth of what she had given him? She had pulled his children back from the brink, given them laughter again, and with it, given him hope. But gratitude, he realized, was only the beginning. In quiet moments, he found himself studying her, the way she carried herself with calm assurance, the patience in her eyes when the twins grew stubborn, the warmth in her voice when she told them stories. He noticed her laugh, low and rich, carrying through the halls like a song. It unsettled him. He had promised himself, after his wife's passing, That love was behind him. His heart was buried with her. To feel something now, something new, for another woman felt almost like betrayal. Yet he couldn't deny it. The more time he spent around the nanny, the more he admired her. The twins adored her. They clung to her hand when they walked in the garden, begged her for just one more story before bed, even began sneaking into the kitchen to help her cook. The house that had once felt like a tomb was alive again, and she was the reason. One evening, as the father stood in the doorway of the kitchen, he caught a scene that stopped him cold. The twins sat on stools, giggling as the nanny helped them roll dough with their small hands. Flour dusted their hair, their noses, even her cheeks. They looked like a family, not a grieving household, but something whole. His chest tightened. For weeks, he had been standing at a distance, an observer in his own home. And for the first time, he realized why. She wasn't just saving his children. She was saving him. Later that night, he poured himself a drink in his study, but the taste was bitter. His mind kept circling back to the same thought. How much he relied on her now, not just for the twins' sake, but for his own peace of mind. And underneath that, something he barely dared admit. He was drawn to her. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the flicker of the fireplace. "What are you doing?" he asked himself. She's their nanny. She's here for them, not for you. But no matter how hard he tried to push the thought away, it stayed. Quiet, steady, growing stronger with each passing day. And somewhere deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. It began subtly. A lingering glance across the dining table. A soft smile when their hands brushed by accident. Long conversations after the twins had fallen asleep, where silence was no longer heavy, but comforting. The father had never meant for it to happen. Love wasn't his plans, not now, not ever again. But the more he fought it, the stronger it grew. Every time he heard her laugh, every time he saw the twins run in her arms, every time she spoke to him with that calm honesty, something inside him shifted. But he knew the world outside wouldn't see it the way he did. He was a wealthy white businessman, constantly in the public eye. She was a black nanny, hired under desperate circumstances. The whispers would be cruel, the scrutiny relentless. He imagined the tabloids, the boardrooms, the country clubs. A billionaire widower marries his children's nanny. They'd sneer, reduce her to a headline, a stereotype. And yet, in the privacy of his home, the truth was undeniable. She wasn't just the nanny. She was the anchor that kept his family from drifting apart. The tension came to a head one evening after dinner. The twins had gone upstairs, and he found her in the kitchen, wiping down the counters. For a moment, he simply watched her, the quiet strength in the curve of her shoulders, the ease with which she moved through the room that had once been so lifeless. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked softly, not turning around. He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Because I don't know how to thank you. Because gratitude doesn't feel like enough anymore." Her hands stilled on the cloth. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Careful," she said. "That's a dangerous thing to say." "I know," he admitted. His voice was rough, thick with emotions he had tried to bury. "But it's the truth." For a heartbeat, the air between them was charged, something fragile, something electric. But she pulled back first, shaking her head. "I'm here for your children," she said firmly. "Not for this." He wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. She was right. It was complicated. It was risky. The world would judge them. And yet, he couldn't stop the way he felt. Over the next few weeks, they carried on as though nothing had been said. But the unspoken truth lingered in every glance, every accidental touch, every late-night conversation. Love had taken root between them, but it lived in the shadows, secret, unacknowledged, yet undeniable. And though both of them tried to ignore it, the twins seemed to sense it. Children always do. The day would come when the shadows couldn't hold it anymore. The truth couldn't stay hidden forever. The father tried to bury his feelings under gratitude, under duty, under fear of scandal. But love has a way of breaking through the strongest defenses. And in the quiet corners of the mansion, that love was growing impossible to deny. It was the twins who forced the first step. One evening, as the nanny tucked them into bed, one of them looked up and asked, Why don't you just stay forever?" The words were innocent, but they landed like a stone in the father's chest. The nanny froze, her eyes flicking to his, uncertain. Later that night, when the house had fallen silent, he found her in the library, shelving books the children had scattered. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "They want you here," he said quietly. "Not just as their nanny, as family." She shook her head, her voice low. "You don't know what you're saying. The world will tear us apart. You'll lose respect, position." "I don't care about the world," he interrupted, his tone steady now. "I care about them, and I care about you." For the first time, she looked at him not with caution, but with something softer, something she had tried to guard against. And in that moment, they both knew the fight was over. The proposal wasn't grand or public. It happened in the garden, under the fading light of dusk. He knelt awkwardly, his hands trembling, a simple ring clasped between his fingers. "I don't need a nanny anymore," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I need a partner. I need you." Tears filled her eyes. She tried to speak, to protest, but the twins, watching from the window above, burst into laughter and cheers, running outside to wrap themselves around her legs. Their innocent joy made the choice clear. She nodded, tears streaming, and whispered, "Yes." The wedding that followed wasn't about wealth or spectacle. Yes, the flowers were beautiful and the music grand, but at its heart it was intimate. The twins walked down the aisle beside her, holding her hands, their faces glowing with the kind of happiness that money could never buy. When the vows were spoken, it wasn't just a man and woman uniting. It was a family being rebuilt from ashes. The father's voice shook as he promised love, not just to her, but to the children. And when she answered, her words were steady. "We are already family. Today just makes it official." The applause rang out, but what mattered most was the sound of the twins' laughter. The same laughter that had once seemed lost forever. The mansion, once cold and silent, was alive again, not because of wealth or control or appearances, but because of love. A love born not from fairy tales, but from struggle, healing, and second chances. And so, the widower, his twins, and the woman who saved them all walked forward together, not as broken pieces, but as a whole. A family,